Does loving Jesus mean hating your father and mother? Let's check it out. All right, this is episode 17 in our study of the Gospel of Luke. If you haven't seen any of the previous studies, I'll leave a link in the description for the playlist so you can check them out. While there, please consider subscribing to stay up to date as new studies are released. Also, if you find the study to be helpful, consider liking it below as it helps it to be pushed out to others as well. Continuing in chapter 12, Jesus, having spoken to the disciples regarding covetousness, as well as trusting God for our provision, continues by charging the listeners with readiness for the coming kingdom. In Jesus' previous illustrations in the same chapter, he warned against believing ourselves to be ready by way of accumulating earthly goods and wealth, prioritizing physical means of attempting to have security and safety. Now he points to being spiritually ready instead. Let's pick it up in verse 35. Be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit. Be like men who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks. Jesus draws an illustration of servants awaiting the return of their master, dressed and ready for service, even with lamps lit into the night. In fact, this idea of being dressed in readiness is sometimes translated as girding oneself. In that time and culture, men would wear long robes, and in preparation, they would tie up those robes in a manner more conducive for work, lest they prove to be a hindrance. Likewise, the lamps mentioned held a process as well. Prior to being lit, the lamp would need to be filled with oil for a fuel source, and they would have a wick that would need to be trimmed. All of that is to say, it's vital that we seek the Lord and allow him to reveal within us if there's some way in our lives in which we need to be brought into submission to him, some way that he needs to prepare us for him. We can't afford to allow the loose ends in our Christian walk to hinder us in our work for him. Instead, we would be wise to allow him to shore up our spiritual garments, to trim the wick of our hearts, and to fill us with his Spirit so that we can shine as a light for him. Verse 37. Blessed are those slaves whom the master will find on the alert when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will gird himself to serve and have them recline at the table and will come up and wait on them, whether he comes in the second watch or even in the third, and finds them so. Blessed are those slaves. Jesus continues blessing those who remain on alert, ready and prepared for him at all times. Yet he also mentions the master's response to these faithful servants. In a way that would seem somewhat backwards or potentially even absurd, the master, coming to find his servants prepared and ready for his arrival, serves the servants as he has them recline at the table. In the faithfulness and obedience in the life of a believer, we are blessed to enjoy communion with our master, this one who, even though he was worthy of all glory, came as a servant. Verse 39. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have allowed his house to be broken into. You too be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. Jesus abruptly shifts the imagery from that of a master returning to that of a thief coming. While the comparison of Jesus to that of a thief may seem odd, the principle behind the parable is what truly matters. Just as a thief would not attempt to invade a home at a time in which the owner would be aware of, lest he be on guard, so will Jesus' coming be at an hour least expected. The principle remains true. In the potential for the Lord's return at any moment, we should be prepared at every moment. In self-examination, if we were to know this day that the Lord was returning, how would our conduct be? What sort of actions or activities would we be engaged in? What sort of behaviors would we lay aside? Knowing that he calls us to live in a manner of anticipating his return at any time, what holds us back from doing those things in readiness for him? Verse 41. Peter said, Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well? And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and sensible steward whom his master will put in charge of his servants to give them their rations at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But if that slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. Continuing his charge of readiness for the disciples, Jesus begins to draw a contrast between a faithful servant and an unfaithful one. For both examples, they are placed by their master as a steward in charge of giving rations of food to his servants, ensuring that they are fed. In the faithful example, the servant is diligent in the work that is given to them, operating in obedience to the master's wishes. On the other hand, in the unfaithful example, rather than caring for the servants, he begins to consider that the master will not return soon. With this kind of mentality, living without the expectation of the master's return, he begins abusing the servants and misusing the resources entrusted to him, using that which was intended to feed the servants to satisfy his own violent, drunken gluttony. Much as both examples begin with differing actions and attitudes, they offer differing consequences as well. For the one who is faithful, they are placed in charge not just of the feeding of the servants, but also of all the possessions of the master. Meanwhile, the unfaithful attitude results in the servant being cut to pieces and treated as an unbeliever. For us, this example given by Jesus brings us to a place of self-examination. As followers of Christ, children of the living God, servants and workers in his kingdom, we've been tasked with a mission and purpose by our master. How effectively are we carrying out his charge for us? Are we living as examples to the world around us of the goodness of God, sober-minded, ready and prepared for his coming whenever it may be? Or are we distracted by the cares of the world, distracted by its pleasures and treasures? Peter would later remind us of the proper attitude in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 through 16. Let's take a quick look. Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Fix your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. In being ready rather than being distracted with worldly lusts, we are called to conduct ourselves in a manner of holiness. Verse 47. And that slave who knew his master's will and did not get ready or act in accord with his will receive many lashes, but the one who did not know it and committed deeds worthy of a flogging will receive but a few. For everyone who has been given much, much will be required, and to whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more. With great power comes great responsibility. We're responsible for that which has been entrusted to us. The resources, talents, skills, abilities, or any other blessings we've received have been given to us for a purpose, to glorify God. Should we choose to mismanage them, utilizing them for our own benefit and our own glory rather than to point others to him, he will be responsible for that mismanagement. Verse 49. I have come to cast fire upon the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled, but I have a baptism to undergo, and how distressed I am until it is accomplished. The attention and mind of Jesus, much as we've seen in many examples throughout the gospel accounts, is focused squarely on the mission for which he had come to accomplish. Here he describes the impending crucifixion, his death and resurrection, as a baptism that he must undergo. In a certain way, you can even hear the distress in his voice as he considers the suffering of the cross to be so abundant as to be immersed in it. Yet even in his distress, he continued forward into that suffering anyway, for your sake and for mine. He states, I have come to cast fire upon the earth. While there has been much debate regarding the meaning of this statement, the purpose and meaning of this fire, such as that perhaps he is alluding to the coming of the Holy Spirit or the persecution that would further proliferate the spreading of the gospel in the church, Jesus indicates his eagerness to see it begin. Much as fire changes the very structure, composition, and even the essence of everything that it comes into contact with, so also does the presence and teachings of Jesus. His coming in ministry, it changed the very fabric of the course of history, setting ablaze a tremendous ministry that would be spread to the ends of the earth. On a personal level, the presence and teachings of Christ within us changes the very condition of our souls, purifying and cleansing us, burning away the chaff and anything that doesn't resemble Him, transforming us and our lives to reflect Him. Verse 51. Do you suppose that I came to grant peace on earth? I tell you, no, but rather division. For from now on 5 members in one household will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son and son against father, mother against daughter and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. For the early church and even some in the church today, this proved to be all too literal. Many were persecuted, even martyred for following after Christ, turned over to their persecutors by the members of even their own families. While the eventuality is that through what Christ accomplished, we will see peace upon the earth until the time when He returns to set all things right and to establish His physical rule and reign. The unfortunate reality is that by following Him, we will find ourselves at odds with the world around us. To follow Christ brings us to a place of division from the world, set apart from it for the purpose God has intended, to bring us into holiness and righteousness in Him. This process of purification and sanctification in us further reveals the sinfulness of our surroundings, sometimes even the members of our own families. Set our allegiances to Christ first, foremost, and above all, even as it places us at odds with the world. Verse 54. And He was also saying to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, a shower is coming, and so it turns out. And when you see a south wind blowing, you say, it will be a hot day, and it turns out that way. You hypocrites, you know how to analyze the appearance of the earth and the sky, but why do you not analyze this present time? Jesus now rebukes the people of that day, chastising them for being attentive to the meteorological signs of their time, but not the spiritual signs. As Jesus points out, they utilized the appearance of clouds or the blowing of a southern wind to draw conclusions about the incoming and impending weather, and yet they were unwilling to examine and consider the signs presented before them spiritually to discern the time that they were in. Much as we are held responsible for how we utilize that which has been entrusted to us, those present who rejected Jesus' ministry were responsible. They had the evidence presented before them firsthand. Their Messiah was in their presence face to face, and yet they rejected Him. Just as they were responsible for discerning their time, so are we also responsible for discerning ours. We have been called to take part in this time of the Great Commission, spreading the gospel to the ends of the earth. In self-examination, are we acting in accordance with the time that we've been given? Verse 57, and why do you not, even on your own initiative, judge what is right? For while you are going with your opponent to appear before the magistrate, on your way there, make an effort to settle with him, so that he may not drag you before the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I say to you, you will not get out of there until you have paid the very last cent. Here he encourages the hearer to use sound judgment. To do so would mean that now, before we come before God as our judge, before we close our eyes in death, while it is still called today, we should take the opportunity to settle the enmity between us and Him by way of Jesus' finished work on the cross. Jesus has offered us the avenue to which we can be reconciled to the Father. Much as has been the running theme for this passage, we are responsible for our response to this opportunity that's presented to us. He paid the price, incurred by the totality of our sin, of which we were fully indebted and he owed none. To reject this payment resigns us to separation from him. Jesus states, I say to you, you will not get out of there until you have paid the very last cent. And so if we were to reject this payment, attempting but unable to atone by our own power, we would find that state of separation to be unending. Thankfully, though, while we have the opportunity here and now, we can choose to surrender everything and turn all of ourselves over to him so that we can enjoy peace and fellowship with the Father both now and into eternity. So this brings us to the end of Luke chapter 12. Next time in chapter 13, we'll examine as Jesus continues his journey toward Jerusalem, teaching along the way as he calls the hearers to repent. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to stay up to date as we continue studying together. Thanks for watching.